Afternoon. Good afternoon, or depending on where you are in the world, good morning or good evening. My name is Diarmaid Brannock. I am Director of Academic Affairs here at iheed, and absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this masterclass on the deployment of AI in healthcare. Joined by two esteemed colleagues, Professor Mark Sujan from the University of Warwick and Dr. Tom O'Callaghan, the CEO and founder of iheed. And they'll introduce themselves in a minute and get into the actual masterclass itself. This is one of a series of masterclasses run across 2023 and 2024. Some are publicly available, some are only for students enrolled on our programs. And what we are trying to bring is a series on some of the most topical areas in healthcare, AI obviously being a very prominent one at the moment. Future ones will include social media, finance for non-financial professionals, refugee health, patient engagement, healthcare compliance, and a whole range of subject areas that will hopefully empower you to improve health systems and ultimately deliver better patient care. Throughout the next hour, we will welcome as many questions as you have. Obviously, with so many people on the webinar, the voice is disabled for everyone, as is the chat, but the Q&A is where we would love to get as many questions as you have. So you'll see the Q&A tab down the bottom. We will answer those either in real time or at the end of the session. And your question, you can ask it publicly or privately. And again, we may answer something that's relevant to the group publicly. So the session is being recorded, and you'll get a copy of the recording afterwards to rewatch. And with that, I'm delighted to hand you over to Dr. Tom O'Callaghan. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Diarmaid. Thank you very much. I'd really like to welcome everybody to this important discussion. I know that many of you joining are practicing clinicians like myself, and others are leading within your healthcare organizations as you think and plan for the future development within those organizations. And as many of you who are already in the iheed digital community know, our team are very passionate about providing you with access to the education you value that allows you to deliver better care to your patients, that enhances your career and improves your global mobility. And as you know, we have a suite of over 12 postgraduate diploma and master's programs with our leading global partners like University of Warwick, Royal College of Physicians, London South Bank University, Irish College of General Practitioners, and others to support you on that journey. And also by joining any of our programs, you become part of a family, which I believe we are, who share a common purpose and a common ambition to improve patient care across all our communities in over 130 countries where we support you, doctors, nurses, and others working in the healthcare field right now. And embedded in each of our programs is a really sharp focus on innovation. And in this fast-changing world, particularly using and adopting the latest technologies and tools and systems to help you in your daily work. And today we're talking about one of those, which is artificial intelligence. And whether you count yourself as an AI evangelist, which some do, and others doomsdayers, one thing is clear: we're all at this critical inflection point in the evolution and adoption of artificial intelligence, with large language models like ChatGPT, Google's Bard, and the acceleration of many new products and services that will further transform healthcare, which are coming off the back of these recent developments. And we're told it's going to profoundly change our world and how we do everything, and our lives will be better by technologists, but they would say that, wouldn't they? And I'd be interested to hear people's views on that. In Mark Anderson's essay, Why AI Will Save the World, and I will share a link with this and people can read it later, he imagines a future where every child will have an AI tutor with infinite patience, compassion, and knowledge, and every individual will have a similar assistant, mentor, therapist, trainer to maximize our output. Every scientist will have an AI collaborator to expand our ability to research and enhance our achievements. And every doctor and nurse will have one of these too. And there will be new industries, new jobs, faster scientific breakthroughs and therapies and medicines. We've all read about it in the news. And he points to AI bots being already more empathic than their human counterparts. And I know Mark will refer to this. He believes rather than making the world harsher and more mechanistic, he believes that we will be infinitely more sympathetic and patient. And I wonder what our views are on that. And in healthcare, we've seen some of the existing deployments of AI over the last few years in medical imaging, decision support, predictive analytics, virtual assistants, drug discovery, telemedicine, robotics, etc. So I suppose, how do we prepare ourselves for what the opportunities are here? And what are the risks? What are the real life issues for us as practicing clinicians and those working in healthcare? And how should we be thinking about these things and focusing on them? Professor Mark Sujan is a key faculty member at the University of Warwick and teaches as faculty on our Healthcare Leadership Masters. And Mark is a deep expert and passionate believer in human factors research. And I'm delighted to hand you over to Mark. We look forward to his thoughts, and afterwards we'll regroup for questions and answers. Thanks, Mark.
Right, thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. So my name is Mark Sujan. I think it's probably quite useful to give you a bit of insight into my background so that you understand how I look at AI. Because by background, I'm a Chartered Ergonomist. So for those of you who don't know what that is, I study people at work. I study how they work, I study how we organize work, and I try to inform the design of tools and technology like AI, but also the organization of work and the assurance of the safety and the well-being of people at work. And so already from that description, you can see I'm neither a clinician nor actually an AI expert. So I will talk about the use more than the actual technological details of AI, where actually, many of you will have much more insight than myself. In terms of my day job, I work part-time in the NHS at the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch. What we do is we investigate patient safety incidents, but not to blame people or blame technology or anyone for that matter, but to identify systems-based lessons and learning for the NHS in order to make the NHS a better and a safer place for staff and for patients. Also, I've got so many different hats, but one of my other hats is I'm leading a special interest group at the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, where we have a community of practice around digital healthcare and artificial intelligence, which is a really friendly and welcoming place where we debate current trends and how we can help designers and users of AI technology and digital technologies in healthcare just to design them in a better way, better meaning here with a view to staff well-being and patient safety. So that's my background and the take I will give you on AI in healthcare. Right, so as Tom already said, the hype around AI these days couldn't be any bigger, I think, but also some of the fears. People are afraid that their jobs may be lost, that they will be replaced, and then there are more existential fears around AI. And it's quite common now to start almost any presentation with a reference to ChatGPT or any of the other competitors. And as many other people have done, I just asked ChatGPT, tell me how to deliver a masterclass on AI in healthcare. It's quite informative, really, and you can have a little play around. What I will do is different from what ChatGPT suggested, but still quite an interesting tool to play around with. But if you look on Twitter and elsewhere, every day there are so many developments, so it's actually impossible to keep up with what's going on. And so, that really is one of the main reasons why people in regulatory roles, but actually beyond that, are somewhat concerned about whether there's too much power in the development of these technologies and whether we are actually understanding what these technologies are about. And it's quite natural that, even though ChatGPT is not designed specifically for healthcare, that in healthcare we start playing around with it. Of course we do. It's an interesting tool. It can be potentially useful. It's good for publications, of course. And so I'm on the editorial board of BMJ Health and Care Informatics. And so we receive a lot of papers now. I just put one up there on the left, which was recently published in the journal, which looked at whether ChatGPT could be used to classify brain tumors and to recommend a treatment regimen. It was a small study, and what the study found was actually the classification was quite poor, but suggestions around treatment afterwards were encouraging. Now, that's not to say that we should be using the tools straight away. What it does, however, hint at is the power that these tools have, both on our imagination, but then also for the application in healthcare. The New England Journal of Medicine just recently had or started a series this year on AI in healthcare. And I picked up one of the papers here, but I make reference to others later, which looked at the benefits and the limits and the risks of using ChatGPT and other kind of chatbots in healthcare. And so it's well worth a read. I mean, there were kind of things which were quite interesting around, we could use it, for example, for medical note taking, but there are peculiarities such as sometimes it imagines things which it didn't even hear, and so it integrates non-existent information into notes. It's quite good as a Q&A, kind of for checking medical background. But actually, again, when you want to use it in consultation, it can come up with things which sound highly plausible, but are actually wrong. And that is then very hard to identify. And so, people are highlighting both the benefits, but also the risks, which are as yet probably underexplored. And this is another classic example of a phenomenon associated with ChatGPT and other chatbots, which is referred to as hallucination. And so depending on how you talk to it or how you write to it, it comes up with sometimes very surprising things which are just not true. So it makes up stuff, basically. In this instance, it was asked, how do you know so much about, I think it was diabetes management? And it said, well, I've got a master's degree or something like that, and I study a lot, whatever, which obviously, is complete rubbish. But even more interesting, you can then feed that back into ChatGPT and ask it to give its opinion on what it's heard. And then it will identify, actually, this is nonsense. An AI chatbot doesn't have master's degrees. So there are really peculiar patterns of behavior and interaction emerging here. And we are just really at the beginning of seeing these, understanding these, and knowing what they mean if they were to be used in clinical practice. And that kind of level of concern and the speed of development and the lack of regulation and understanding of risks and lack of societal consensus, I suppose, around these issues has prompted, the Future Life Institute, I think it is called, and a significant number of researchers and celebrities to call for a pause in the development of large-scale AI research or deployment until we have really understood a bit more the risks and how to manage these. Probably futile, but what it does do is it kind of fuels a bit, a larger societal and political debate about these issues. So as I mentioned, I'm really no expert in AI technologies, but it's probably quite useful to have a couple of slides about what we mean when we talk about AI, and in this instance, machine learning specifically, just to understand why we might be somewhat concerned or what the peculiar things we need to look out for are. And so in terms of machine learning, there are three major kind of ways of getting the AI to do what we want it to do. One is so-called supervised learning. So in essence, you present labeled data sets to the AI tool, usually a neural network. And then you have an algorithm which calculates an error function, and it tries to reduce the error function. And so it's in essence a classifier based on previously labeled data. And so the labeling of data is really important. But then there are unsupervised learning algorithms where in essence you just present lots of data to the AI and you ask it to identify patterns which are meaningful to the AI, and it might identify patterns which are not meaningful to people or which were unanticipated because it is unsupervised, so you leave it to its own devices. And the third class is the so-called reinforcement learning, where you specify a reward function, and depending on what the AI does, it can try to maximize or optimize its reward. So if it does something which moves it further away from its goal, it would get penalized. If it moves closer to the ultimate goal, it would be rewarded, and it self-organizes in this way. So the key really here, as simplistically as I put this really, is that machine learning is data-driven. So it learns from the data. We pick the data, we choose the data, we pick the learning algorithms, but we do not hard code or program what the actual algorithm then in its execution looks like. So the machine learning algorithm will learn, self-organize in a way based on the data which it sees. And largely, machine learning these days is built on artificial neural networks. And so, in the way they were developed, they try to mimic or simulate or take inspiration from the human brain. So largely about neurons and the interactions between the neurons. But so my knowledge of AI is back in the 1980s. I did the master's in artificial intelligence, but that was in the 80s and 90s. We used one so-called hidden layer and a standard backpropagation algorithm. That is where I kind of stopped in my development. But of course, these days we have, and you can see that here on the right, so-called deep learning neural networks, which have loads and loads and loads of hidden layers, which do different things and are much more sophisticated. And that is really why we are now seeing these significant advances. But bearing in mind, we are seeing these significant advances largely because of the advances in computing power and in memory and storage availability, and in the cost, which has gone down significantly. And so you can see it here, the really incredible development in hardware, which underpins the recent advances and the breakthroughs which we are seeing in artificial intelligence, which are really enabling in many ways to feed the AI tools with all the huge amounts of data which they need. And so, still these images are from the New England Journal of Medicine, from that special issue series. So applications in healthcare, I've got a few examples in a moment, but just looking at how people have used it, maybe the most successful and the most prevalent application examples are around image analysis, so analysis of X-rays and CTs and so on and so forth. That plays into the strength of machine learning, which can classify things quite well. So these are probably the most mature applications. During COVID, public health examples became quite interesting. A company whose name now I forgot was credited with identifying COVID first based on analysis of social media traffic and communication. So the AI picked up on recurrent themes around chest problems and coughs and so on and so forth in the community, and was then able to identify hotspots, which is a quite interesting use of AI. Then there's also, of course, less contentious, if you want to put it like that, use of AI, backroom use of AI for scheduling and logistical purposes, which of course holds a lot of promise. But the breadth of AI application is endless, and of course we will see AI applications in all areas of health and social care. So I promised a few examples. One of the really early studies of deep learning were Google Health's mammography study, and I've put that on the slide because it was a very good one in terms of its scientific approach. And I'm not commenting on the tool at all, but the scientific approach was good because it illustrated something quite forcefully, even though the researchers didn't highlight it to the extent that it merited, in my view. But so what they did is they trained their tool to identify areas of concern from mammograms based on a large data set procured from the UK, as well as a much smaller data set procured from the United States. And so when they trained the algorithm on the UK data set, tested it on UK data, it performed really well. Once they started testing it on the American data set, the performance dropped significantly. And that is ever so important because we need to bear in mind that the AI learns based on the data which you feed it. If the data is representative of one context, but not representative of another context, we are in serious trouble. And I'm mentioning that for the reason which is largely around, well, health inequalities, I would say. You know, if you think about it, a big promise which AI gives us is to support low-income countries where there are, you know, shortages of trained clinicians and so on and so forth. And we're saying actually AI could make a significant difference in these countries. But where does the data come from? You know, usually these algorithms are trained and developed in wealthy countries, representative maybe of a more white population, but also not just population characteristics, also technology characteristics, technology where these images are taken. And so the operating context in the deploying countries, if we're talking about low-income countries, might be very different, and the risks might be quite significant. In the UK, we've got Chiron Medical, who have the mammography intelligent assistant, which, you know, I mean, I kind of had the pleasure of working with them on a kind of side project, but so I learned a bit about their approach. And, you know, it was really quite interesting, both their kind of aspiration as well as the approach they're taking in terms of evaluating the technology, having clinical trials now in a number of European countries. But so they make the point that in the UK, as well as elsewhere, we have a significant shortfall in our diagnostic workforce capacity. And so the current practice of double readers of a mammogram, for example, so independent double reading, is just not sustainable. And so what they're proposing is, well, if we can substitute one reader with an AI tool, so we can have a human reader and then independently the AI reader, we can significantly reduce the diagnostic backlog. And that would be ever so important because we had one not just because of COVID, but before COVID, but COVID has made it even worse. And so people need to wait way too long to have their investigations done. AI could make a significant difference. But it's not just clinicians, you know, who can use AI. Of course, patients, well, everyone really can have it on their smartphone. I've picked up this little tool here, not because I think it's particularly impressive, representative, whatever, just because I attended a presentation where someone gave away a free code for it. So I downloaded it and tested it. Well, the reason I've got it here is actually it's quite cheeky in a way. So this is for detection of skin cancer. And I kind of had a little spot on my arm. So I took a photo and then it says, yeah, you don't need to worry about it. But what I want to highlight is more, you know, in order to get this done, I'm not sure whether you can see it on the slide. It's quite small for me here, but you need to sign over your data for not further specified research and health purposes. So actually what I'm thinking is, you know, we need a bit more dialogue about what happens with our data when we feed it into these applications. You know, how transparent are the developers, and you know, why are they forcing us to consent to this? You know, why can't we use the tool without consenting to our data being used for whatever purpose they feel fit? So, you know, I think there is a lot of work still to be done, around privacy and, in any case, how health data is used. So, but machine learning, AI is of course already here. So ideally, we would go down the route of having it regulated and certified as a medical device. And there were a couple of papers looking at the number of devices using machine learning on the market now. An earlier one looked at a number of devices having certification between 2015 and 2020, but actually more recently, I think it was published not too long ago, this year at least. So they found 508 unique machine learning based medical devices already on the market. So, that will grow exponentially. And so, that is already with us. And it's probably fair to say the regulators are really having trouble to catch up here with the developments. And so we need to kind of almost take a step back and think about the hype and the reality of AI in healthcare. The hype is always in the news, and of course, technology developers need to push for their tools. They need to justify the funding and so on and so forth. And often what we see is kind of the opposition in a way of, people and AI, where the headline is doctors are being outperformed by AI, or put it the other way around, AI outperforms doctors. AI is better at people at doing X, Y, and Z, which is very narrow and restrictive in a way. And actually, when we look at the evidence, the scientific evidence to support these claims, it's quite weak, it's quite patchy. There's nothing to justify, these claims really. And one of the big problems is we have very, very few prospective studies. So all of these studies which make these claims tend to be retrospective studies. So they will look at nicely procured data sets in isolation, but not in a clinical setting. And that is what is really missing here. And so that phenomenon has really been captured quite nicely by what is referred to as the last mile in a way. So a lot of focus on data, but then also building the model, testing the model on data, but retrospectively. And then where it all falls down is once we start integrating it into the messy world of real life healthcare. So that is really where our focus needs to be from the outset, really. It's understandable that technology developers have a focus on the technology, but there must be someone somewhere, or the agency, that sets it out quite clearly. You need to have the implementation at the forefront of your thinking right from the outset. So that is where we come in, being systems thinkers, let's say, within our profession. So at the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, I'm kind of shamelessly making advert for the membership body. But we published a white paper on human factors and ergonomics in healthcare AI. And what we are saying there, quite simply, is the focus so far has been on the technology. It was all about the AI itself, so about data quality, about the accuracy of the algorithms, whether there's any bias in the data, all important kind of attributes. But actually, the bigger picture is really equally or more important. And so we're arguing for a systems perspective. And so you might, ask, what on earth do you mean by a systems perspective? Really, a systems perspective just means AI is simply a tool. It is not an end in itself. And so, there will be people who have to interact with the AI. So we need to understand people, and we need to understand how people interact with technology and AI specifically. But the AI, as well as people, might be interacting with other tools. So we need to, understand how does the AI interface and integrate into our existing IT infrastructure. People, as well as AI, will never work in isolation. Clinical systems are full of other people, other purposes. And so we need to understand, what does it mean for teamwork, for relationships among people, and for the organization of work, really. And then let's not forget the patients, of course. What is the impact on patients and on actual patient care. AI will not deliver patient care as such, and definitely not in isolation. And so we need to really understand what happens when we start to introduce AI into a messy, busy, complex clinical system. And so, one of the projects I was working on was with the Welsh Ambulance Service, who were approached to test and ideally purchase an AI tool which can support call handlers in the recognition of cardiac arrest calls. So cardiac arrest calls are frequently being missed, and of course, every minute of delay in getting help to the person in cardiac arrest will reduce your chances of survival significantly. So, there's justification for such a tool. Now, such a tool has been developed, it has been tested retrospectively. So the tool can listen in the conversation and then can identify whether or not this is a cardiac arrest call. So the retrospective study, and I apologize, it's probably again too small to see the detail. The retrospective study found that actually the AI tool was better than the human call handlers at identifying cardiac arrest calls, and it was quicker as well. So that's a great starting point. But as I was saying, retrospective evaluation. Once the same tool was then implemented into an urban call center, I believe it was in Copenhagen, and tested prospectively, what the researchers found was actually the joint system of call handlers supported by AI did not perform any better than the call handlers just by themselves, right? So this is sobering. The evaluation did not go into the detail of why that happened. They kind of speculated, but it didn't go into actually collecting evidence around that. But that is precisely what we need. We need to know what happens when you integrate AI in the technical system, and more importantly, we need to already design it with the socio-technical system in mind. So I did something which apparently was novel or kind of unexpected. I asked call handlers what makes the recognition of cardiac arrest calls difficult. You would have thought that this would be the first thing that people do, but no. The first thing which people do is let's have the data, let's put it into the AI, and let's check whether the AI is better than people. So there I was interviewing call handlers. What makes it difficult? Quite interestingly, they said, actually, a cardiac arrest call is among the easiest calls which we can get. So, okay. But how do we then explain that so many calls are missed? Well, so they were saying, actually, there are a few things. First of all, cardiac arrest is a really kind of challenging situation for the caller to be in. They might be agitated. They might be in denial. And when you ask them, is the patient conscious? Are they breathing? You might not get an honest answer. You will get wishful thinking as an answer. And so it relies a lot on your personal, interpersonal skill to get the right answer, to get to the truth of what's happening. But then there are things like poor phone connection, where the caller might be on a mobile phone and the phone connection keeps dropping out. Then there are situations where the caller is the patient themselves and they have kind of slurred speech or something really hard to understand. And so, they highlighted these kind of challenges to what otherwise would be a fairly simple decision which they can make. And so that prompted me then to think, what's the underlying design metaphor here? So technology developers have substitution as their metaphor. Let's get the AI to do what the people do. Not to replace people, but it's the design metaphor. Let's let them recognize cardiac arrest. Let them do what people do. But actually, talking to people, if you wanted to support people, maybe they need something quite different. Maybe they don't need anything that would generate the sexy headlines of AI outperforms people. Maybe they need something to make slurred speech more intelligible. And these tools can be developed for sure. Maybe they need something to enhance, phone audio quality to support the technology developers. not as exciting, not as sexy, but I can't say, but I can maybe bet on it, maybe more successful than just having the standard substitution design metaphor. The other thing which we found is organizational readiness or lack of organizational readiness. So organizational readiness refers to whether an organization is willing to adopt something, a change, a technology, or machine learning in this instance, and whether they have the ability to do so. Welsh Ambulance Service, definitely very willing, super keen to adopt the technology. And I hope I don't offend anyone if there's a member of WAST on the call, but probably not yet so able. And so there were lots of things, kind of, an understanding of what AI is really about, what it can do, what questions to ask of the developer, what organizational mechanisms, structures do we need to have in place to procure data, for example? How do we even share data with a developer? Where is data going to be hosted? Can we share data? Do we have a legal basis for sharing audio data of call handler or of calls coming into the call center? These kind of things. No one had any answers to that. In addition, the safety culture was very individual focused. And if you think about it, the AI is supposed to be a support tool, and the developer was very quick to say, it won't replace people. But you need a lot of psychological safety to say, actually, I'm going against the AI recommendation if you are living in a culture which tends to blame the individual. So, in the interest of time, I will just move a bit further. One thing which I found really interesting, and it's often neglected, is the impact on patients. And so I interviewed patients who were previously on intensive care about their attitudes and perceptions around the use of artificial intelligence in their care. By and large, everybody was very positive, and they said, yeah, of course, if the NHS is using it, then it's going to be great. If it helps me, it's going to be great. And, positive throughout, regardless of age, really, young and old patients. But what struck me was something which they were saying, but I don't want kind of to lose the personal contact with the nurses. We have such a special close bond. It's such a traumatic experience in intensive care, especially. And so you rely on that human connection, on that human touch. And you can say, from a technology developer's perspective, of course, the AI won't impact that. No, the AI will free up nurses to spend more time at the bedside. That's great. But you can also see the business perspective. The finance department saying, hang on, we now have this fancy new AI technology. Do we really need nurses kind of, on a one-to-one basis with patients? Or now that they have the technology, can they have 2 patients maybe, or 3, or maybe in a couple of years, 5, 10 patients? So what patients and I don't want to see is that nurses become almost carers for AI technology rather than caring for patients. That impact on the personal relationship is super, super important. So what can we do? Well, the answer is, first of all, we need to, of course, think very carefully about what's going on here, but we need support. And so the British Standardization Institute, BSI, just recently concluded development of a new standard which proposes an auditable validation framework for healthcare AI. What it really tries to do is distill all the diverse set of guidance and standards and recommendations into one simple auditable framework. It won't do everything for everyone, but at least it brings together a lot of the information in one place, and you can audit yourself against that. So that will be published fairly soon. The paper explaining the rationale has already been published. And so you can see, for example, I managed to get human factors ergonomics in there. And so there are a few kind of sub-clauses which you then need to demonstrate that you are considering about usability, around understanding the user requirements for training, for example, how you manage the potential for automation bias, and so on and so forth. And so that standard is something which organizations should demand, in my opinion, of technology developers who come and approach them and say, actually, would you like to purchase our smart new AI tool? In the future, organizations should ask, well, are you being compliant with BS 3440? And more widely, and just concluding, this is my last slide, with the New England Journal of Medicine again, quite nicely, kind of suggested kind of safeguards for AI development and use. So rather than just looking retrospectively, is the AI or the machine learning, is it accurate on the data set? We really want to promote real-world evaluation, which also means from the outset, understanding the clinical system within which it will be operated. We need urgently useful post-deployment monitoring. There are things which we aren't clear about, such as, how do we collect data? Who owns that data? Which we need to look at. Does it belong to the patients? Does it belong to the healthcare organization? Does it belong to the manufacturer? We don't know. Issues about transparency in the development and the reporting. Again, things that are currently being debated, but for which there are not yet proper solutions. So, that is something to consider. And so just a shout out again to the Chartered Institute, just a bit of self-promotion, but I think the white paper, which is free of charge, is useful, I think, for the community, because it helps us to think a bit about the systems and maybe helps us to ask the right questions. Right, so thank you very much. And Tom, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. You've given some, a really good and balanced view of some of the issues that are facing all of us as healthcare practitioners. And there are some themes coming up in the questions really around bias, practical applications, governance, accountability, equity. And I think they're all areas you've touched on and are all areas we could spend lots of time on. I have one specific question just to start the questions. Many computer scientists focusing on AI ethics have really pointed out the near-term harm that could come from perpetuation of biases and the potential for misinformation. That seems to be what we're seeing a lot in the media. What's your view of that, Mark?
I was muted. Yes, no, I completely agree. I would say a number of things. So first of all, there are lots of examples where that is already the case. And so, for example, I mentioned, where data sets come from and how AI tools, which have been trained on certain data sets, do not perform as well for other population groups. And so, that has been documented. There's an interesting book which people might find useful to go to. It's called Weapons of Mass Destruction, which I quite enjoyed reading. Yes, and so I think ethics is important. It is not necessarily my area of expertise, but lots of people are already working on that. And so the Alan Turing Institute, for example, in the UK have published a report. The European Union has guidance on this. So there is a lot of active discussion and debate and awareness around that issue.
Yeah, I saw a very good description of it. Said AI, you should treat it like a child, that it needs a mom and a dad to supervise it at all times. And I think, it's just a very simple but a good description. Some of the other questions coming in. One question, should the wealth of anonymized NHS patient data be sold to large tech companies like Google for research with AI? I know you have a view on that.
Well, that is a really, really challenging question to answer. What I can say is Google got itself into trouble. So Google DeepMind, they were developing an AI tool with the Royal Free, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And so the Royal Free shared a lot of patient data for the development of AI and testing. And Google and the Royal Free both contested that, in order to develop safe AI, we need to have actual data. But there is no legal basis for the sharing of patient data for the purpose of development and testing. And so again, I am not an information governance specialist, but I can probably say from previous experience, there is a massive hole currently in information governance practices as far as data sharing for AI are concerned. And so, yeah, so there's GDPR, so the European Act. And so, as well in the UK, we've got the common law of confidentiality, or whatever it is called. Again, yeah. I'm not an expert on that, but so you need to establish the legal basis, and that is far from simple. I give you the example of the ambulance service. The ambulance service initially thought, well, we're just de-identifying the calls, and then we can share it. But no, it's not so simple, because even audio data, which has been de-identified, carries your voice. And when it carries your voice, it can carry indicators of your ethnic origin, of your sociocultural background. These are actually classed as identifiers.
Yeah.
So anonymization is super, super tricky.
Very tricky. And in truth, the reality is Apple and Google already have your data, would be my view. So there's a good follow-up question to this. Do you think, who do you think should be at the table when laws start to be put forward for AI to protect patients, people, potential for healthcare systems?
Well, a range of stakeholders, but I would just focus on one often forgotten, the public.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what I mean by that is, so there's a concept which is gaining traction, and it's about responsible research and innovation. And what it really says is that regulation, first of all, needs to be much more based on a societal dialogue. We need to involve people, in the discussion. We need to make these discussions available to people. We need to be responsive to their concerns, and we cannot consider that we are able, especially with AI and machine learning, to have one set of regulations that will just fit the bill and we're good to go. It needs to be a continuous cycle of reflection, really. And so everybody needs to buy into this. Regulators as well as technology developers need to be more responsive and more responsible as well.
Yeah, and I think also what we're seeing as you have disintermediation of healthcare, and of the healthcare system, that providers are kind of going around regulation in truth, and being able to access your data. Another question here is, junior doctor, how can I learn how to implement AI in my daily job? I mean, it's a very good question. I think it's kind of, we'd all be struggling with how is this really going to be implemented in my daily job, or how proactive have I to be, or do I wait for it to be implemented by others around me? Yeah.
No, I mean, that's a good question. So as I was saying, I'm not a clinician, so I can't really say. What I would say is, take the examples of ChatGPT and other kind of things as reminders of the dangers and the risks that might be there. So that's not to say, never use it, never try it, but be mindful of the pitfalls. And if I just extend that one step further, I think organizations need to encourage AI literacy among their staff, among themselves. Organizations, as well as deploying clinicians or using clinicians, need to be able to ask the right questions. And what I mean by that is, if you think about an infusion pump, for example, in the olden days, you were told, which button to press and how to operate an infusion pump, and that was it. And you knew whether it was working or not. With machine learning, it is very difficult because it's so context dependent. You need to be told what are the boundaries of use of the ML tool, where can it perform, and where is it not safe to perform anymore. And actually, that paper which I showed previously about 500 medical devices using ML have already been certified. They looked at the reported incidents. A significant proportion of incidents leading to patient harm were because clinicians misinterpreted the design boundaries of the ML. this is not to blame the clinicians at all. What I want to say is the developers and deploying organizations need to ensure that we as users understand the design boundaries, and that these design boundaries are very clear to us.
Yeah, there are a number of questions, Mark, too, around radiology. The future of radiology, I suppose it's been interesting. It's been an area where AI has already developed fairly significantly. One of the questions is really around who's responsibility, and if something's misinterpreted, who's accountable, and who for a discrepancy.
Yes. Well, so let's start with accountability as a word and a concept. You will have a legal perspective, and I really cannot comment on the legal perspective. But I mentioned, so, I work at the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch, where we investigate incidents. And we will, of course, in the future, investigate incidents involving machine learning. Now, accountability in our kind of interpretation is not about whom do we blame or who gets the sack. It is more about who can give an account of what happened. With whom do we need to talk to understand what happened? Why did it make sense to, act in a particular way in this situation, so that lessons for the wider system can be identified? So, that is probably not as simple an answer as the question might be getting at. But it is a difficult undertaking. But I think we need to distinguish between the legal interpretation and then the safety investigation for the purpose of learning. Yeah.
Just maybe we'll start to wrap up, Mark, but one last question. If you're to look at the whole landscape now as somebody who's been involved in human factors, if you were to pick your top 3 areas where you feel that AI will have the biggest impact in the next 5 years, next decade, what would you think they are?
That is a good question, and it's probably even beyond my imagination, and hence I will conclude on the 3 things which I think we definitely need to generate that impact. Yeah. And I think, first of all, I alluded to it, organizational readiness. We need to support organizations to understand their organizational readiness and identify the gaps. Yeah. We need to build an education and training infrastructure. We used to have Health Education England. They have been merged into NHS England. We used to have NHS Digital. They have been used into NHS England. Who is going to provide that training? At HSIB, we try. Here within this forum, we try, but we need that training infrastructure. And lastly, we need a systems approach. People need to be aware of what is the systems approach, and that needs to be integrated from the outset, and we need to insist on that.
Yeah, it's a very good place to finish. I think ultimately, if we don't, as doctors and healthcare professionals and people who work within the sector and who run and manage healthcare infrastructure, if we don't get involved in the discussion and take a leadership position, then what happens is technologists implement solutions upon us that don't really work for us or for our patients. So with that, thanks a million, Mark. On everyone's behalf, I'll thank you most sincerely for today and hand you over to Dermot. And thank everybody for joining.
Mark, to echo Tom's thanks, that was an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I think looking at the questions that have been coming in, that there's very real concerns over how AI is going to be governed, regulated, and what it practically means for people, but also that question of accountability and that question of how do you govern something so powerful. And we're at the very start of this journey, is what it feels like to a lot of the people on this call. I suppose I'd finish on a note that this type of debate and discussion is the type of debate and discussion at the heart of our programs, and an awful lot of people on the call today are here because you have expressed an interest in or have been a student on or an alumni of one of our programs. So what we want to do very, very briefly is we've launched a poll. If you are interested in hearing about any of the specific programs. So Mark is a tutor on our Masters in Healthcare Leadership. We have a portfolio of programs across all of the main kind of career enhancing areas of healthcare. So areas like education, clinical research, public health, leadership, etc. And then a range of very clinically specific courses. These are all wholly online courses. They are generally interprofessional. We're very strong advocates of that. The faculty on these programs are, as you've seen from Mark, absolutely world class. And you know, the insight and information and confidence is what we get as feedback from our alumni. And I think the ability of education to spur the imagination and make people think differently, irrespective of the particular program they're on, is huge. We, you know, iheed, we are absolutely proud to be one of the world's largest providers of postgraduate healthcare education, and we're extraordinarily proud of the impact that our alumni are having within their health system. So fantastic to see so many people filling out that poll so quickly. So our team of education advisors will be delighted to talk to anyone about the programs. Any of the information that you want, you'll get on iheed.org. And I'll just, Tom, if I hand over to you for the last thanks to everyone, but absolutely amazing session today.
Just to thank everybody, and if you feel that there are areas for future program development that you'd like us to focus on, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you'd like to join us as faculty or supporters of the organization in any way, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. And thanks everybody for joining, and have a great weekend. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.